Hello, this is your instructor Taz Talley. And in this video, I want to show you how working in Photoshop, we can use histograms and then RGB data to evaluate and color correct an image. And I really want to show you how effective you can be color correcting and tonal correcting an image just using what we call the 80-20 tools. That is, just using histograms and making semi-quantitative adjustments using just the visual data in histograms. Then we'll fine-tune it using RGB data, a more quantitative analysis and adjustment, and compare the two. And then we'll finish up with a tonal adjustment. And by the way, that's the order in which you should always correct an image. Color first and then tone. Because if you start with tone and the color isn't balanced, you end up having to go back to tone time and again after you correct the color. So color first and then tone. Before I get started, let me just talk about my tool space here. Is when I'm working in doing color correction and tonal adjustment of images, I set up my Photoshop workspace always the same way. I have my image here, I have my Photoshop toolbox over here, and I always have my eyedropper tool. All right, selected. All right. And it's just the straight original eyedropper tool. Nothing else. You know, there's 4 tools over there, and I just want the straight eyedropper tool. I'm going to show you how, using some keyboard shortcuts, you can really flexibly use that tool. So Photoshop tools over to the left. Then I've got 2 sets of panels over here, 2 pairs of panels. One, the histogram, in which we see the distribution of tone and color, and then my info panel, which we're going to use for viewing and monitoring RGB values, for evaluating the image and then for correcting. And then over here we have the layers panel and then the properties panel. These two I always connect to each other, and if you don't know, you can take panels and you can snap them together. So I'm just moving the properties panel up here, boom. See the little blue line that comes up? Then they're combined together, kind of joined at the hips. When I move one, I move the other. So histogram, info, this is where I'm looking at data, qualitative and quantitative, and then a layers panel, and then we're going to create some adjustment layers. And when we do that, we're going to be able to see the editing tools for those adjustment layers down here in properties, which is why I always have my properties panel attached to my layers panel. Okay, so that's the Photoshop workspace. Those are all the tools that I use for doing color correction and tonal correction in my images in Photoshop. Before we go any further, I just want to remind you of one of the foundational principles of color, digital color, RGB color images, and that is there's no actual color that you capture. All you actually capture is grayscale, and all color is actually created in an output. Let me show you, prove that to you. This is an RGB color image of the shark, right? And here's the RGB colors. I'm going to use the channels panel to show you the basic building blocks of this image, just as a reminder. This is RGB, which is the master channel, but the building blocks channels are red, green, and blue. And notice it's nothing but grayscale on these 3 channels. So when I captured this image with my underwater camera, all I actually captured was 3 grayscale channels. All right? And the value, those grayscale values in those channels are based upon the color in the original scene, but all I can actually capture is grayscale. And then when I output this, either to a printer or to a monitor, then those grayscale values are used to build color on the outside. So the basic concept is that if we get the grayscale values in the 3 channels correct, the color will be correct on output. And one of the fundamental tools and techniques we use is called neutralization. That is, if we can find neutral areas, that is, neutral gray areas in an image, and neutral gray in terms of RGB means equal RGB values, if we make our neutral gray areas neutral, the color will then be correct. All right, so I just wanted to remind you of that basic fundamental concept of RGB is actually built on grayscale, and all color is created on output. So we get the grayscale correct, and then the color will be correct on output. All right, I'm going to move the channels panel. We don't need that anymore. And let's take a look and start evaluating our image. Now, just visually, and I love to use this image to do color correction because it's such an extreme image. And this is a white-tipped reef shark that I shot diving on the Great Barrier Reef some time ago. And it turns out that sharks are such great color correction tools because sharks tend to be, well, gray, neutral gray. So if we can get the sharks to be neutral gray, we're going to get the color right. So just visually looking at this image, we can see there's a very strong color cast. a blue-green color cast. And also the contrast, the tonal contrast is kind of low, and we'll see why for both of those in just a second. So when we shoot underwater, by the way, this is a typical scene of a very blue-green image. And they're typically blue-green because the longer wavelengths of light, the reds and the yellows, tend to be absorbed by the hydrogen bonds in the water molecules. So everything tends to look blue, blue-green. As you go deeper and you lose more of the reds and more of the yellows, things look deeper and deeper blue and finally into the purples. All right. So how blue-green things are, how blue things are, depends on how deep you are. So the amount of blue or blue-green color cast is going to depend upon depth, but you'll always have a strong blue-green color cast visually. Let's step over here to the histogram and see if the histogram gives us any insight about where this blue-green color cast comes from. Now notice over here in the histogram, I have this displayed. I'm just going to click right up here in the upper right-hand corner on the histogram panel menu and say All Channels View and Show Channels in Color. Right? Even though we know this is actually grayscale data, it's really visually helpful to look at it in color. So we want to see All Channels View and Show Channels in Color. And then what we have up top here is the master histogram, which shows all of the data in the image, therefore the tonal distribution. Then we have the data on each of the three grayscale channels, the red, the green, and the blue grayscale channel. And sure enough, when we look at these three channels, huge offsets of the blue to the green and the green to the red. And this qualitatively, visually confirms what we see over here visually in the image, is this image has a huge blue color cast and has a blue-green color cast. And the way we tell that looking at histograms is we look at the highlight end, right? And if a channel sticks out to the right, like the blue channel does, it goes all the way to the highlight and then some, all right? It sticks out way to the right of the green, so we have a strong blue color cast. But the green also sticks out significantly from the red, indicating, okay, there's a blue-green color cast, and there's very, very little red in this image. Notice that most of the red data goes from the mid-tone down to about the three-quarter tone. These long flat areas here that you see on histograms typically tend to be noise in the image. The actual data starts where it starts to bump up and get a little bit rough on both ends. Right? So that's what these long flat ones typically are, just noise and not actually image data. Notice that the green goes from just past the mid-tone towards about 70%, all the way up into the highlight area. And then the blue goes, again, from three-quarter tone, 70%, all the way to the highlight. But there's more of the data in the highlight to quarter tone area. So we have visual confirmation of this blue-green color cast, no doubt about it. Now, notice when we look up here, another reason I love to use this image, you could really see the three distinct data sets that go into the master histogram, right? The blue, the green, and the red. They combine together, and you get a pretty good tonal distribution from highlight down to about three-quarter tone, which matches what we see on the dark end of all three channels, but not much data from three-quarter tone to shadow, which is why this image has a blue-green color cast, but also has fairly low overall contrast because we're missing about 20 to 25% of the data in the image on the shadow end. There's no deep shadows here, so the overall contrast is not horrible, but it's not great either. All right, all of that we're going to adjust and correct the color and the tone. But remember, what's first? Color. All right, so before we make any adjustments, now that we've done some histogram qualitative-based analysis, or semi-quantitative, because we're making it based upon graphs that we see, just not numeric. I'd like to set us up to do some numeric evaluation and some fine-tune adjustments. And we're going to do that by setting a diffuse highlight and shadow points. Because what I like to know is, where's the lightest portion of this image that has detail, particularly an important portion of the image, and then the darkest portion of the image that has detail. And to find those out, and we're going to set color sampler points there to help us measure RGB values, is we're going to create a curves adjustment layer, and then we're going to use curves to do all of our adjustments. Some people will go to levels, which is a good starting place, but in levels, you can only adjust highlight, midtone, and shadow. With curves, you can adjust all three channels and the master channel across the entire tonal range. All right, so it's a very powerful tool. So we're going to make a curves adjustment layer, and of course we're making an adjustment layer because it's a non-destructive editing tool. We can make as many edits to this as we want. There's no final impact on the image because they're not applied until you actually export the image or save the image. So we're going to come down here, make a curves adjustment layer, and watch, it's going to add a curves adjustment layer up here on the curves panel. All right, and notice that it adds a layer mask, but it's solid white, which means that the curve is going to apply to the entire image. If we only wanted this curves adjustment to apply to a portion of the image, we could make a mask and assign the mask to that layer mask on curves. But we're color correcting the whole image, so we're not going to do anything here. We're going to click right on the curves icon, and notice what happens, what comes up down here in the properties panel. All right, whatever you click on here, the controls for that will show up down here. So if I click on my layer mask, then I get layer mask controls. If I click on the curves icon, then I get curves control. Now you see why I tuck my properties panel up underneath my layers panel, because whatever I select here, I can then correct down here. All right, so we know we've got a reduced contrast image, and we have a very strong blue-green color cast. How do we go about adjusting this? All right. But remember, first we're going to set highlight and shadow points. Let me show you a little tool and trick you can use here. Hold down your Option key, Alt in Windows, and then click on the highlight end. We're going to use this to identify the lightest area of our image that has detail. Click on it, and notice the image will go black when you hold down the Option or Alt key, and then start dragging that highlight slider to the right, and you'll notice that the areas of the image will start to light up. And then the area that goes white first will be your lightest diffuse highlight. You'll notice you find a little area down at the bottom of the image, but also on the tip of the shark. All right? And that's really the one that I'm interested in. All right? So it's that tip of the shark. So I'm going to Space Command, I'm going to zoom in here. All right? So I can see a little bit more clearly. And remember, we set a 3x3 color sampler point up here, right? Always select your eyedropper tool by default, and then set a 3x3. And if you're measuring large areas, you can go 5x5, but I always use a 3x3. So doing tone and color correction, I always select my eyedropper tool, set a 3x3, then zoom in here, and then I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and notice a little color sampler point comes up. All right, and then watch over here in the info panel when I click on here. I'm going to click on this white area, boom, as you can see here, and that creates a color sampler point for the lightest white highlight area. And then I'm going to put that back, and then we'll go Command 1, all right, then space bar and just move this up into here, recenter the image. Right? Then we're going to do the same thing on the shadow end. Option key on Mac, Alt on Windows, and drag this, and everything is light, and then the dark areas start to darken up, and notice we see that the back fins get dark and get really early on. That's an area that we're interested in. So I want to look at that back lower fin there, all right? And space and Command and zoom in. And again, Alt, and you can see the black area. All right, and then we're going to Shift click, set our color sampler point there, Command 1, Control 1, space bar, recenter our image. There we go. And return that slider, and now we have a highlight and a shadow that is critical shadow, highlight, and shadow detail areas selected. And just for grins, I'm going to go ahead and set a color sampler point somewhere near the midtone, because we're going to look at the RGB values across the entire spectrum, tonal spectrum of the image. And I'm going to choose a well-lit portion of the shark here. Again, I'm just in my eyedropper tool. Hold down the Shift key that momentarily, again, activates the color sampler point, and I click, boom, and now I've got 3 color sample points: highlight, shadow, and then midtone. And this is what I typically do. I do it in that order. I go highlight and shadow are points 1 and 2, so they're always the same in every image that I correct. And then usually a midtone or maybe a facial RGB if I'm doing portrait work, but somewhere in the midtone, or other neutral areas. You can have up to 10 color sampler points. But here I've got 3 neutrals: a neutral white highlight, a neutral shadow, and then a neutral midtone. Why am I calling these neutrals? Because I know from experience, from looking at them, sharks are gray, right? Sharks are living color, neutral gray swatch charts that are swimming around in the ocean. So we can actually use these to help us fine-tune our correction by neutralizing using numbers. But Okay, now that we've got that set, let's take a quick look at our values and see what they look like. See if we get quantitative confirmation of what we see visually, blue-green, see semi-quantitatively by histograms, blue-green, and then look down here. Highlight, red, green, and blue, 159, 242, 253. Perfect, right? Blue greater than green, greater than red. Midtone, 32, 57, 78. Again, blue greater than green, greater than red, indicating the blue-green color cast. And then in the shadow, in the midtone, that's the shadow, sorry. And then the midtone, 93, 164, 171. Again, all across the tonal spectrum, we get quantitative confirmation of our blue-green color cast. All right, so now we're all set up to go ahead and start our correction. Let's make our correction first, just based upon our histogram data. So let's come up here and let's name this curves. We're going to call this curves, and then CC for color correction, and I'm going to call this histogram. All right, because then we're going to duplicate that and then fine-tune it and then compare the two. Fine-tune it with RGB values using quantitative data. All right, then hit the Enter key to apply. And then we see the master histogram here, right? With the blue, the green, and the red histograms all combined together. But we also have control over the individual histograms. Now, notice that we've got keyboard shortcuts here, which I'm going to use to save a little bit of time. And I always use keyboard shortcuts to navigate through from master channel to red to green to blue. And it's Option on Mac, Alt on Windows, and then 3, 4, and 5 to move to the 3 channels. All right, so Option, I'm working on a Mac today. Option 3 takes me to the red channel. All right? And we notice that there's very little data in this image. So, and because we have this huge offset of these 3 channels, our goal here in making a histogram-based adjustment, right? We've already done a histogram analysis. Now we're going to use perform a histogram-based adjustment. And our goal is to line up the highlight and shadow points of these 3 channels to balance the color using the histograms. To do that, we start with our red channel and take the highlight data, and notice there's no data, no data, no data, and then a little bit of noise, all right, that we've got here. That's the real flat. And then when we start to see the data bump up, right about there, see the little tick up in the data? That's probably the very start of the red data in the image. All right? Now, while I'm doing this, put your eyes up here as I move that slider over again and watch what happens to the histogram. Do you see how the histogram, right? It's active, it's dynamic. It moves as I move the curve's red channel. Cool. And look how the red and the green channel now line up pretty, not perfectly, but pretty darn close. Much better than they were at the start. All right. And then same thing on the shadow end, right? We're going to take the shadow end and move the shadow end over because we'd like to get a little bit better contrast in this image. All right? That moves the red back over a little bit, but remember, we're going to move to green next. All right, so there's the red channel adjustment just based upon histogram. We're setting the highlight and the shadow points based upon where the data starts in the image, with our intention is to line up the highlight and shadow points on all 3 channels, thereby balancing the color. Look what's happened already over here. All right, and let's before and after. Before and after. Things are already improving, aren't they? Let's go to the green channel. Option 4, go to the green channel. No adjustment to be made on the highlight end. We're already at max, right? In fact, it looks like we're a little blown out, all right? In fact, you can see that over here in the RGB, right? Is the green, green is pretty close to being maxed out. Did you see right here? All right, and the blue is very maxed out. It's in the mid 250s. All right, but then, so the adjustment we're going to make here is on the green channel is just move the shadow slide over until we see the bump up in the data, and watch what happens to the green histogram when we do that. See, now the red and the green are almost perfectly aligned. Look at that. And look at the change in the image. Before, after. Things are improving at every step. They can only get better, right? So now let's move to the blue channel, Option or Alt 5. And again, the blue, no adjustment may be made. In fact, we see a little tick up, which indicates a blown out area. And again, the high 250s indicates we're just about blown out on the blue end, which is fine, no problem. But we don't want to we don't want to move the data in any further. We'll lose more blue data. But we do want to make this adjustment on the shadow end to move this in like this until we just start to see the data bump up here. All right. And there we go. We just start to see that data bump up. Boom. And notice we have now moved the blue data over. Now we've got the blue distributed from highlight all the way to shadow, just like we have the green and the red. Notice that the mid portion of the blue is still over to the right because this image has got so much blue background in here, and it's kind of in the mid-tone. So that's why that's the big tall peak. That's why we look at the highlights and the shadow ends and make our adjustments based upon those positions, not where the mid-tone data is, not where the mid-tone spikes are, because that really is based upon the content of the image, not the color balance. All right, so there we go. That's an 80-20 correction. And look at this, look, before and after, right? Before and after. Huge difference. And if we just did that, that would be an enormous improvement, wouldn't it? That's why we call it an 80-20, quick and dirty. Big difference in terms of the overall correction of this image. But now let's look at RGB values. Let's fine tune this a little bit in terms of both our evaluation and our adjustment. Let's start with the midtone, all right? Let's just start with the midtone and look at the RGB values because that kind of gives us an overall evaluation of the color balance now. The numbers on the left are the starting numbers. 93, 184, 164, 171. That's that huge blue-green color cast. Now look, 128, 143, 137. Boy, much, much closer, aren't they? Much closer. 128, 143, 137. Pretty nice, all right? Let's look at the number one control point, which is the highlight. 249, 239, 253. Again, much closer. Not perfect, all right? Not exactly neutral, but not bad at all. And then we look at the shadow, 15, 11, 9, as opposed to 32, 57, and 78. So we're pretty darn close on all this, all right? Can we make an improvement? Can we? Yes, we can. We can fine tune this, and let's go ahead and do that. But what I want to do is I want to make a new channel. We're going to duplicate this channel. So I'm going to control-click, right-click on this. I'm going to say duplicate channel, and we're going to call this the histogram, and then plus RGB, all right, which indicates my kind of shortcut and we'll turn off the first channel because we have a duplicate of that. And then let's fine-tune our channels based upon what we see in terms of our RGB values. Let's start with the highlight point. Notice these are all a bit high. 249, 239. 239 is not bad, but blue is a bit too high. But let's go to the individual channels and just fine-tune them, all right? So I'm going to go, where do we want them? Mid-240s. That's about a 5% white highlight that we know will print on just about any device. So in the 250s, we start losing data when we output to print devices. So let's go to the red channel, and let's just fine-tune the red channel on the highlight end so that it's about mid-240. It's close right now, isn't it? It's pretty darn close. So what I'm going to do is I can just click on this highlight control point if I want, right? Or this is what I recommend. Learn this keyboard shortcut. Hit the plus sign until that control point is selected. When we start adding additional control points, you'll be able to hit that plus sign and go from control point to control point. And then what that allows you to do is instead of having to manually move these control points with your mouse, you can use your up and down and left and right arrows, all right? So I'm going to choose that, and I want to lower that 249, right? We're looking at this RGB value here. So I'm just going to fine tune. I'm just going to move that, hitting the right arrow, all right? And notice while I do that, I'm going to move it down to 245, all right? 242 is a perfect pure white highlight at 5%. We'll go mid-240. 245 is just fine, all right? So we made a highlight adjustment there on the red channel. Let's now move to the green channel. So let's go Option or Alt, and then 4, go to the green channel. Notice the green channel is a little low. It's at 239. Notice it's pre-selected, the control point on the highlight, because we just selected that on the red channel. So I'm just going to take my left arrow and move this in a little bit, just a little bit, 2 or 3, boom. Now that's right at 245. And then let's go to the blue channel, Option or Alt, 5, all right? And here, that's pegged all the way to the right. And if we bring it to the left, it's going to raise, which we don't want to. So we're going to lower it. We're going to go to the down arrow and watch the blue value here. all right, until we're right about at 245, 246. There we go. Very good. So now we've got a nice neutral pure white highlight, but let's look at our, our midtone. And by the way, I don't pay an awful lot of attention to the shadow value, the exact color balance in the shadow area of most images. Some images I do, but so long as they're fairly close, I don't worry nearly as much as I do about the highlight and the midtone. All right, so let's look at the midtone. We've got 125, 147, 133. All right, they're pretty close, but notice the green is a little bit high, isn't it? All right, the red's a little bit low, the green's a little bit high. The blue is kind of intermediate. And, you know, when I've got this kind of offset of 3, I'll generally kind of choose the intermediate one as kind of my target value, particularly if it's around the midtone. So what we'd like to do is raise the red, lower the green a little bit. And I don't know if you can see this on screen in the video, but this looks pretty good. But if you look carefully, you can see there is a little bit of a green color cast here. All right, and it's borne out by the raised green value that we have right here. It's not awful, but it is evident. All right? So let's start with the red channel, and let's go. So option 3, go to the red channel. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, remember I've got my eyedropper tool, all right? I'm going to hold down my command key, all right, which is control key on Windows, and I'm going to click on this midtone color sample point and watch what happens over here on the curve. A control point is automatically added at the midtone. Right? So now we've got 3 control points, one at the highlight, one at the shadow, and one at the midtone. Right? And again, just sidebar, I can press my plus key and just move from one to the other. All right? And that allows me, again, to use my up, down, left, and right arrows to adjust the position, therefore the value, the red value where I am. So we're looking at the red value on the red channel. We're at 125. We're using the blue as our target, so I'm just going to raise that a little bit until it's up to 132, 133. Boom, there we go. Now I'm going to go to the green channel, option, all right, and 4. I'm going to do the same thing, control, right, or command on Mac, and then click on that color sampler point. And notice it gives me a color control point on green, and we've got 147. And I'm just going to lower that until we're right at 133. Boom. And notice, take a look at this value now, the gray on the side of the chart. Here, I'm going to go back up to 147 for you. And now just watch the shark as I come back down. See how it goes to neutral gray? Perfect. Very nice. Now we've got a really, really nice neutral gray shark. Right? So we've fine-tuned it. We fine-tuned it. And notice that because we set our color sampler points here on the highlight, our color sampler points have not changed. Our RGB values have not changed in the highlight. They've just changed in the midtone. That's why you set individual color control points on individual portions of your tonal range and then perform color correction there. Very good. All right. Very nice. Nicely done. I could do this. I could do a fine tune of the color, you know, in the shadow point, the number 2 shadow point. We can certainly do that. If we go to, and notice that the green and the blue are pretty darn close to each other. The red's a bit high, so we'll just go ahead and do that. Let's just go to the red channel. All right, and then we'll just hit the plus key. All right, and until we get down to that color sampler, the color control point on the shadow. All right, and then we can just lower that. All right, or raise it using our left and right arrow. All right, to get it close to the other values. All right, just fine-tuning the shadow. If we wanted to make sure that we had a nice black neutral shadow on our fin back here. So now once again, so we have neutralized the highlight, the midtone, and now the shadow, very, very close. Yeah, we're good to go. But one thing that we might want to pay attention to now is, you know, the number 2, which is shadow points. They're a little low. If I do want to make sure that they maintain detail there, I probably want to just fine-tune the tone on those a little bit, all right? And that's what we'll do next. But first, let's take a look. Let's turn this off and compare the 2 color corrections, right? The 80-20, the first, the histogram-based adjustment, pretty darn good. Huge improvement. But we can now see, because we've been looking at this, we can see there's a bit of a green color cast, just like what was indicated down here, right, in our midtone RGB. We turn that off, and then we go to the fine-tuned version, boom chakalaka, right? Now that's dead on, isn't it, right? Very nice. So are we done? Yeah, we could be, but we can also make a tonal fine-tune, a tonal adjustment. Now's the time to do it. So to do that, I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to duplicate this layer once again, and we're going to call this the color correction histo plus RGB plus, and then my keyboard shortcut is just the tonal range, right? The contrast, toned in contrast to the image. And what we're going to do is move down here to our master histogram and just watch the number 2, the shadow values here. I'm going to press my plus key, all right, until I select my shadow control point here. And then I'm just going to, I can move this, I can move it to the right, which lowers it, lowers the RGB values, or I can raise it up with the up arrow until we get everything up about 12 to 15, and then we know that that shadow is going to print. It's not going to fill in. What else can we do? We can overall lighten this if we want to. We can, so increase brightness. We can lighten the highlight. We can darken the shadow to increase contrast, to give it more of a sinister look if we like. And all the time, we can monitor our RGB values, right, and see, because we're making a tonal adjustment, it doesn't affect the ratio of red to green to blue because we're making a master channel type adjustment. All right, so there, we fine-tuned the tone of our image, and let's take a final look here. There's our start. There's our 80-20 histogram-based adjustment, which is very good. It's about 90% of the way there. There's our very fine-tuned, all right? And then there's the fine-tuned RGB plus histogram plus a little bit of tone adjustment to adjust the overall brightness and contrast. So there we go. There's a full color correction for image evaluation and color correction, first using 80-20 histograms, fine-tuning it with RGB numeric adjustments, and using color sampler and color control points on curves, and then a final tone and color, tonal adjustment on the final color-corrected image. So there you go.